So you all had the audacity to call it Impossible 2017. And I want to applaud your audacity and your courage. I want to just give a shout out to my friend for several years now, Larry Acosta, and that whole team. It's just... Look, I don't want to spend too much time because they gave me 30 minutes, and I'm Puerto Rican and Pentecostal, and that's like 30 minutes for a Puerto Rican Pentecostal from the Northeast. That's like the intro to a prayer. In 30 minutes, you're just getting through the names of Jesus. You know, like Lily of the Valleys, Rose of Sharon, Bright Morning Star, Desired of all the ages. And so I was like, 30 minutes? That's the prolegomenon to a prayer. But I'm excited about what God is doing, has done, and will do through you. And I want to take for a few minutes, just a few minutes, a reflection from 1 Samuel 17. You know the story. You've heard the story. You may have lived the story. 1 Samuel 17 is the famous conflict between David and Goliath, between the giant of Gath and the shepherd boy from New Jersey. And I've heard it read many times, and recently I reread a book by Malcolm Gladwell called David and Goliath, where he tried to redefine the conflict in ways that may challenge us to see it in new ways, a shift of epistemology, a shift of truth, a shift of context, a shift of defining. And as I read that book, I remembered I grew up in Lakewood, New Jersey, which is a suburb of San Juan, Puerto Rico, and I went to school at a very challenging time. We were very segregated. There were nocturnal pharmacists that controlled the neighborhood businesses. And some of those nocturnal pharmacists made a lot of money, and the neighborhood businesses continued to grow, and it brought certain challenges to my neighborhood because some of the businesses were rival businesses, and they tried to put each other out of business through means that should not be repeated. Y'all know what I'm talking about, right? Nocturnal pharmacists, neighborhood businesses. Okay, good. And I remember I used to have to walk to high school. And I know this is going to be hard for you to believe, but in high school, I weighed 85 pounds. I'm slightly over that right now, just kind of a little bit over that. And I remember my freshman year in high school, I was being bullied, something I don't wish on anybody. I was being bullied, and there was this guy, we'll call him Michael. That's not his name, but I'm going to call him Michael anyway. And Michael, when he saw me, he used to pick on me, and he used to tell me to give him money every day. Every day he asked me to give him money, 25 cents a day. And I gave it to him. Say, he gave it to him. Ask me why. I'm so glad you asked me why. I'm going to tell you why I gave him the money. Because he was big, he was strong, and he was mean. He was big, he was strong, he was mean. What was he? Big, strong, and I weighed 85 pounds. And so every day, my mom would give me money, and let me tell you, we were not affluent by any stretch of the imagination. I didn't have a lot of money. And every day he would say, give me 50 cents, and I would give it to him, 50 cents a day. Now you got to remember, this is not 50 cents a day back several decades ago. I won't tell you how old I am. And after a while, I just kept giving it to him. And my mom would say, mira, muchacho, ¿por qué tú te doy más dinero y estás más flaco? I'm giving you more money, and you're thinner. I said, well, I like to share it. I'm generous. The Christian love in me just likes to go. And I'd keep giving him the money, And I was praying for Thanksgiving break and Christmas break so I could actually eat and I could actually enjoy something. And I remember going to Thanksgiving break and Christmas break and coming back in January and dreading the day going back to school because I was going to run to Michael, who was big, he was strong, and he was mean. And the first day back in the middle of January to school, Mike came up to me and he says, $1. I said, what? It was 50 cents. Why? He said, inflation, it's a new year. And you know what? I gave it to him. And the reason I gave it to him was because he was big, he was strong, and he was mean. And I weighed 85 pounds. And after a while, my mom kept asking me, pero muchacho, te estoy dando más dinero y tú sigues enflaqueciendo. I keep giving you more money, you keep getting thinner. And there came a time where I was walking home from school, and Michael decided to follow me home. Now, I'm going to date myself because as I'm walking, I'm near my house. He looks down, and I had these Puma with thick laces. Y'all don't know nothing about that. Thick laces and clicks on the back. And he said to me, "Those are good-looking shoes." I said, "I wonder where this is going." And he says to me, I'm gonna take those shoes, give them to me. But I said, "Not today, Mike. Because if you want those shoes, you're gonna have to kick all 85 of my Puerto Rican butt pounds." And I started rolling up my sleeve, and he was about to attack me. I said, "But before you come here, I want to tell you that I'm in front of my house. And I got 2 older brothers that are watching on the window. Their names are Hector and Sam. And as soon as you touch me, they're going to come down." If you're not Puerto Rican, you won't know what this means, but I'll translate. "Como pandereta pentecostal a la fiesta." They're going to beat you like a Puerto Rican tambourine in a Pentecostal service. I'm glad you all sanctified and justice and mercy people laughing about beating somebody up. But I'm glad the conference has transformed your hearts. And he said, "Oh, maybe I shouldn't take him." Let me tell you something. What he didn't know is that I'm the youngest of 3 boys. My 2 brothers are older than me, but one weighed 83 pounds and one weighed 81 pounds. Let me tell you why God has placed you in your city, in your town, and in your region. Because there are giants there that are taking people's money, that are taking people's education, that are bullying people from their dignity. And you are that 85-pound Puerto Rican kid. You are that David in the midst of the valley of decision. And there has to come a time where Christians of this generation says, "We are tired of conceding land. It's our turn now." Slap 3 people a high five and say, "It's our turn now." Touch 3 people and say, it's our turn now. If they look tired, just shake them up and say, "Es tu hora ahora. Es tu hora ahora." This is a bilingual. I'm teaching Spanish today. Di conmigo, "Es tu hora ahora." Say it again, "Es tu hora ahora." One more time, "Es tu hora ahora." It's your time now. But for it to be your time, you need some strategies. And so let me tell you what David had. Number 1, you got to redefine the challenge. For more than 40 days and 40 nights, everybody called him the giant and the champion. And sometimes when you face challenges in your city, or I face challenges in my city, whether they be a low-quality education, as Dr. Nicole Baker-Fulgham often talks about, no kid should be sentenced to a poor-quality education independent of her zip code or his zip code. Jonathan Kozol called it savage inequalities. And that, a lot of people call that giant lack of educational opportunity. But what you see there is an opportunity to be an education champion. And so people sometimes diagnose our cities and our regions by the giants that are in that land. But it's time to define our cities and our regions by the Davids that are going to conquer it. Touch your neighbor and say, "We're going to redefine the situation." And so everybody was calling this boy the giant or the champion. But when David saw him, he called him another thing, the uncircumcised. He says, "Let me tell you the difference between you and me. I have a covenant and you don't have a covenant. And when people with a covenant come into a land, it's to transform the land. It's to heal the land. And I know how to problematize the text. I took post-colonial studies and decolonizing studies, but I also took a study called Conquer the Inner Person, that begins to see you as the person who can't change. We have an option after we leave these conferences. We can curse the darkness or we can turn on the light. We can be angry, and anger has its place because anger is just a manifestation that you've seen an injustice that needs to be changed. Anger has its place because anger is just a manifestation that you see an injustice that needs to be changed. But anger is not enough. Anger requires righteous indignation that leads to transformation. Sometimes you got to turn some tables over and say, we're bringing the covenant to this land where there's no quality education. Somebody's going to stand up and say, every man and woman, every boy and girl, whether they're Asian, whether they're African, they're African American, Native American, First Nations, Latino, Latina, wherever they are, Pacific Islander, they have a dignity, and David is now here, and this giant is going. Touch your neighbor and say, redefine it. You know, I'm so tired. I'm so tired when people come into our cities and they defy it by the giant and not by the David. They defy it by the threats instead of by the promise. The second thing that David understood is that he had indigenous weapons. Sacude tu vecino and tell him or her indigenous weapons. Sacude tu vecino. You're going to learn Spanish one way or another. I'm going to give you extra credit. Sacude tu vecino and tell him indigenous weapons. Say with me, sacude tu vecino. Say it again, sacude tu vecino. That means shake your neighbor. Sacude tu vecino and tell him or her indigenous weapons. Hey. Mírame. Sometimes people want to define you by their social construction. They want to put limits and castrate your potential. People who castrate your potential are only magnifying their insecurity. When they got to stop you so they can become something, it's that they've not understood the God of enough, the God of abundance, the God who loves every single person created in God's image and in likeness. If they got to stop you, it's not about you. I will come down there and preach to you. Indigenous weapons. God placed you in a culture. God placed you in a city. God made you a man or a woman. God cultivated you in a home and in a culture and in a language. And that was not by accident. Oh my God, I'm Pentecostal talking about sovereignty. Help me. It's just a nod to D.A. Horton. And you have something inside of you. You have a history. You have a genealogy. And whether that history is painful, tragic, full of lament and sorrow, or filled of victories and triumphs, whatever history that is, God wants to redeem it in your life so you can redeem it in your city. And so you come with experience. You come with genealogy of thought. You come with genealogy of experience. You come to your city, to your giant, to your region, and you have indigenous weapons. And people want to give you other weapons. You know, at the church where I'm a pastor, a lot of times the young people want me to dress like them. It's not a good look. I'm going to just tell you right now. It's a good look for them. And they say, and sometimes I try to work it out. And when I'm walking out my door, my beautiful wife of 16 years and 11 months and 27 days, 4 hours and 1 minute, she says to me, ¿Pa dónde tú vas? Where you going? Because that ain't you. So God has given you unique and particular gifts. And Saul wants to give you his sword and his shield. But you were raised with a sling and some stones. And if it worked for you to slay the giant, the tiger, the bear, oh my, it will work to slay the giant in your region. And so what I'm here to tell you is that God has deposited everything in you that you need to touch your city, to touch your young people, to touch your... Tell your neighbor, you've got it in there, baby. It's like ragu. It's... Sacude tu vecino y dile, it's in there. Indigenous weapons. You've got to believe in yourself. And that God has beautifully and wonderfully made. That doesn't mean you can't add things. That doesn't mean you can't invest in your talent. That doesn't mean you can't be educated. I grew up in a Pentecostal church, storefront church in New Jersey. Not in the neighborhood, in the hood. They took neighbor out of that place. It was so rough. See, they're defining it by its challenges. And I remember my father always used to tell me, Gabriel, more like, when you're Latino, you have 86 names. Gabriel Alexis Salguero Astacio Echevarría Ramón Rivera. That's my first name. Don't judge me. Don't judge me. Don't judge me. He said to me, entre mejor afinada la guitarra, mejor suena. Entre mejor afinada la guitarra, mejor suena. The better tuned the guitar, the better it sounds. So you have indigenous gifts. You have things that God has sown in you through His Holy Spirit and through His Word and through community and through experience. But you have to invest in them and cultivate them. The day you stop learning, you stop living. And so you expand yourself and you practice with the sling when you're slaying the tiger and the lion and the bear. Because one day you're going to come to the giant. And so I started in a storefront church, Pentecostal church. You know what I was? I was a pastor at 12, the toilet pastor. My dad would be like, limpia el inodoro. Let me give you the slang of inodoro, toilet. And I'd go. And then I became the children's pastor. And then from there I went to seminary. And I learned, Heidegger and Hegel and Nietzsche. I became a true Pentecostal because I could speak Spanish, English, and German. Greek and Hebrew. And I invested in that. Because if God gives you an ability and a calling, you should invest in it. You should practice with the slingshot. You should practice, and you're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. Don't beat yourself up. You're still the daughter of God. You're still the son of God, and you still have a purpose in that region, in that city. But you invest in it. So number one, you redefine the challenge. Number two, you rediscover indigenous weapons. I remember when I was younger, and I'm still young, we did a march in New York City. It was on behalf of immigrants, undocumented immigrants, and deferred action for childhood arrivals, also known as DACA. And as we began to march, somebody told us, hey, pastors, they're going to start arresting people. Let me just tell you, people found out, they were like, I got to go to church, the beans are on, things were just all kinds of weapons of mass distraction. And when they begin to arrest, they arrested 40 pastors and over 100 lay leaders and youth pastors. And they're taking us to this thing, they called it the paddy wagon. First time I'd been there. And they weren't the handcuffs, it was those plastic things that cut your circulation, make you want to be saved again. And they're arresting us. And there's this elderly woman who begins to sing because she rediscovered her indigenous weapons. And she's in the paddy wagon and she's schooling all these people with seminary degrees and all these people who had influence and had 10,000 followers on Twitter. And she's schooling them because the rest of them were in the back of the bus crying, thinking, I got to tell my wife I got arrested. I'm not talking about anybody but me. And this elderly woman, African-American woman, begins to sing, my God is an awesome God, He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. My God is an awesome God. My God is an awesome God. Because every movement has a soundtrack. Every movement has a cantus firmus. To quote Dietrich Bonhoeffer, if you're going to take over the world, you've got to have a song inside of your heart. Or to quote Gloria Estefan, the rhythm is going to get you. And that's an indigenous weapon. Because it's not just strategy, and that's important. It's not just meetings, that's important. You've got to have a spiritual well to face the giants of your generation. Because some giants won't go down easy. Some giants are recalcitrant. The true measure of a man, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, the true measure of a man, he meant men and women, the true measure of a person is not where they stand in times of peace and tranquility, but in times of chaos and crisis. That's where you know the measure. Don't make me come down there. Ask your neighbor, do you have a song? Because the outer music will try to detain your movement. But God is sending you out of impossible 2017 with a song in your city saying, we're going to take that giant down, and all I've got is 5 smooth stones. As we're singing and they take us to the local jail, there was this captain who apparently had a bad day. He was not having it. We'll call him Michael. Listen, I'm going to tell you, there was a real Michael in my life. I'm recovering. There's no side effects. And he was yelling at us. And he was like, sit down. Be quiet. And you know, this is a room that probably was supposed to sit 30 people, and it had over 100 people. Elderly woman. My God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven. Captain Michael comes over. I was like, oh, she gonna get it now. And he goes, from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. I only have one question for you this afternoon at Impossible 2017. Is the song inside of you greater than the threats outside you? And so David had a song. Goliath had a threat, but David had a song. You come against me with a sword and a javelin, with your toxinous weapons, but I come against you in the name of the Lord. Let me tell you something. Sometimes I'm on CNN and Horton try to give you, my story. Right, that's not my story, because sometimes people put their glory on Facebook and on Twitter, but that ain't their real story. Listen, don't get jealous about what people put on Facebook and Twitter. That ain't their real life. They only put their victories on Facebook, on Twitter. When their wife tells them to go sleep on the couch, they don't post that thing, man. I'm going to just tell you, if you following somebody and you got cybernetic jealousy, I just want to tell you that ain't their real life. People only put that, when they're with a superstar, when there's something, that ain't their real life. So you have to have that song. You have to have that determination. You come with me with a sword and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord of hosts. And sometimes I'm on CNN or one of these other Telemundo, Univision, tu canal siempre. Telemundo, vívelo. CNN, breaking news every 30 seconds. I can't recover from the last breaking news. There's a new breaking news. Got breaking news whiplash. And when I'm going to speak, whether it's about immigration or criminal justice reform or reform to mass incarceration or educational equity or the foreign aid budget to U.S. aid, which is 0.08% of the U.S. budget, even though we spend more than 52% on militarism. Oh, is this thing on? And they'll put under there, Reverend Dr. Gabriel Salguero, Christian activist. And there was a journalist who said, Reverend Salguero, is it true that you're a Christian activist? I said, no, that's a redundancy. Because to be Christian is to be active. To be a co-laborer with God and the Spirit of God and the zeitgeist moving into your neighborhood. Your neighbors and your brothers will tell you, what are you doing down here? And you said, I came here to bring bread. You thought you came there to bring bread, but you came there to change the destiny of your region and of your neighborhood. You be faithful, bring in the bread basket, and God's going to use you for something else. No, I'm not a Christian activist. That's a redundancy. To be a Christian is to be a co-laborer with God's work in the world, with God's shalom project. with God's reconciling, healing, and justice project in the world. And so when David comes, he's threatened, but there's the music, the cantus firmus, this is what you believe greater than what faces you. So you have the indigenous weapons, you have the redefining of the reality. And here's the last thing I want to say, I got to go home. I want to remind you that everything we do at the Urban Youth Workers, we do it as Christians. There is a particular distinctiveness. There is a Christian idiosyncrasy. I have worked with Muslims and Jews and atheists and agnostics towards the common good. And I have no problem with that. I will continue to do that. But there is a particular Christian contribution. I come to you in the name of Yahweh, the Lord of hosts. And your work for justice and your work for mercy and your work for reconciliation should always point to the reconciler, the justice maker, and the healer of the nations. You are an open letter of Christ to the world. Gandhi once said, Christianity is a good idea. Somebody ought to try it. And they asked him, what is your problem with Christianity? He says, I love Christ. It's the Christians that give me a headache. And so people are waiting for Davids and Davisitas, just to be gender inclusive, to come to the territory and say, for such a time as this, God has brought me. And I'm not going to be intimidated. And it might not happen overnight. And you may not see it in your lifetime. But keep swinging that sling. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And God has the last word. And Goliath can speak for 40 days, but in 30 seconds, David can change the whole story. And you might say to me, but Gabe, you don't know what I'm facing in inner city Chicago. You don't know what I'm facing in Minnesota. You don't know what I'm facing in LA and in San Diego and in New York and in Brooklyn and in Bronx and in Dallas and in Fort Worth and in Houston and in Charlotte and in Raleigh. The giant of racism. The giant of violence against people of color. The giant of segregation economically and educationally. I see those giants, but I'm wondering if you still have that sling in your hand. I will not go gentle into that dark night, Maya Angelou said. I will rage and rage against the dying of the light. And if it's between me and Goliath and the people that I serve, I assure you, Goliath is going to have a headache in the morning. Voy a dar migraña. But you need something that's in high demand and low supply. What the lion told Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. Courage. Because when you get into this work, your brothers are going to label you. Oh, he's doing it to get attention. He's doing it to have more followers, because you know that justice work is now faddish. Some people do it just because it's in style. And they romanticize the work of Christian justice just so they can get more followers on Twitter. It doesn't just matter what you do, it's why you do it. Christianity don't just ask the what question, it asks the why question. And sometimes you're locked up in the jail and nobody knows it because you can't tweet from the jail, y'all. And so we need courage. You remember the conversation between Lucy and Mr. and Mrs. Beaver in Chronicles of Narnia? That's right. I'm Puerto Rican from the hood. But I got a seminary education. I'm not confused, I'm just integrated. And Lucy says to Mr. and Mrs. Beaver, hey, is Aslan safe? Is following Aslan safe to change your city? The tragedy of the thing is sometimes your brothers are against you while the giant is against you. The church won't let you do the work while secular society thinks you don't belong. Because we're living in what some have called a post-Christian world. And so the post-Christian world doesn't want you, and the Christian world wants to keep you marginalized. And so you have enemies inside and enemies outside. And you're Lucy asking Mr. and Mrs. Beaver, is Aslan safe? And they said to him, Lucy, Aslan is a lion. He's not safe, he's a lion. Lions are not safe. But then he says, but he is good. He is good. Listen, O mortal, what is good and what the Lord requires of us, but to do justice, to love mercy, and as Grandma used to say, to walk humbly before your God. I have a question. Is the giant in your city going to define the region, or are you with your 5 smooth stones, with your music, with your faith, with your tenacity, with your unwavering commitment to the gospel? Let me tell you how this story ends. We leave the jail. I'm leaving with this elderly woman, elderly African-American saint. And she says to me, Sonny, she's not caught up in titles and none of that. Pastor, no. She says, Sonny, come here. When I'm gone, somebody has to keep going. You better never let them stop the music from playing.